Every president has had their fair share of mistakes, but let's look at Biden here. And there's one mistake that he cannot afford to make, and we're going to talk about that. Um, the current president, Joe Biden, who had enjoyed strong approval ratings in his first 6 months in office, is now running up against the difficult reality of being the commander in chief. In addition to a mounting disapproval rating, which tends to set in once the honeymoon period of a presidency wears off, Biden faces an array of obstacles. The pandemic continues to ravage the country, but that's because that was Trump's own doing. The jobs report in August, which was a disaster, and the threats of the Delta variant have bulldozed any hopes of a swift economic recovery. And extreme weather events have exposed just how vulnerable we are to a climate change, but it still remains to be seen how Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan will fucking play out. As we approach the 2022 midterm elections, the president faces a critical juncture. He will need to maneuver carefully to pass key legislations and retain the Democratic majorities in Congress that will allow him to plow on with his agenda, while Republicans are undertaking a massive effort to curtail voting rights and recapture control of Congress in order to make the second half of his term a living fucking hell. But right now, narrow congressional majorities on Capitol Hill leave Democrats little wiggle room to pass the infrastructure bill and the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package on paper. It shouldn't be too fucking difficult to round up the necessary votes. But in reality, people in the Senate, like the closet Republicans, West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Kristen Sinema, can easily upend negotiations. And these are the legislative conditions holding up Biden's biggest domestic program. Biden also faces a radicalized Republican Party that has no intention of slowing down just because they lost control of the White House and Congress. The conservative fervor is evident in Texas, where state Republicans had passed draconian restrictions on the reproductive rights by banning abortions once a fetal heartbeat can be detected. Something that usually happens at around 6 weeks, because that's before most women would know that they're pregnant anyway. The law tramples the rights granted by the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade in 1973, and now that the conservative-leaning bench has decided not to block the Texas law, other red states are likely to follow this suit. But when it comes to foreign policy, Afghanistan was as a harsh reminder of how easily plans can go awry. And while the majority of Americans supported the U.S. withdrawal, the swift Taliban takeover, the terrorist attack outside Kabul airport, and the ensuing controversy and fallout detracted from what Biden was trying to achieve, many presidents and one squatter have been forced to confront the major foreign policy issues, even when it's inconvenient to their domestic agendas. Afghanistan certainly won't be the last crisis of this sort. And of course, as we've seen with the rise of the Delta variant, the coronavirus pandemic is not finished with us, even if fatigue has set in for most Americans. This poses an immense and unpredictable challenge, as the administration will have to continue to shift gears and respond to rapidly changing situation. This will entail continued efforts to expand vaccination and issue new public health guidance to an impatient public as cases rise and fall. What's Biden going to do in the face of all these obstacles? The most important thing he can focus on at this point is keeping his party in line, but he would need to lean in harder on the closet Republicans, Manchin and Sinema, giving them the support that they need to retain their electoral standing, while offering not so subtle reminders about the importance of putting on the united front to fulfill his agenda. If Democrats are perpetually stuck in the legislative logjam as the nation struggles with broken infrastructure, natural disasters, and an ongoing pandemic, there's little chance that voters would give the party another shot at trying to address the many problems that we're going to face in 2022. Biden also has to actively shape his message and agenda rather than react to events and circumstances as they occur. As the going gets tough, it is easy for presidents in the one squatter to be caught up on the wrong foot and get swept up in the noise of the moment. And what great presidents learn is that focus means a great deal. Presidents have the power to keep the nation and Congress on track. They have the ability to keep pushing the specific issues like the urgent need to protect voting rights or address the climate change, even if the news cycle veers off in two different directions. If they succumb to the frenzy of the moment, it can become almost impossible to keep their heads above water. And let's take Afghanistan for instance. Biden demonstrated an understanding of this. Despite all the fire and fury that came his way as a result of the tragic deaths of the 13 U.S. service members, he pressed on with the withdrawal, saw to it that the U.S. ended its involvement in the disastrous war, and repeated his rationale for doing so. The current Supreme Court, which is in the culmination of a multi-decade conservative project, that started in the 1980s to nurture an enormous network of judicial prospects and move them into the federal court system, it's a reminder that Democrats needed to do a more long-term strategizing. And when it comes to packing the courts and other challenges such as gerrymandering, Biden cannot afford to push these problems off. Though doing so might not save him from the vagaries of the moment, they can, over time, change the course of the nation and cement his legacy. And finally, Biden cannot forget to invest in his party. Critics accuse President Barack Obama of not doing enough to help the Democratic National Committee going into the 2010 midterm elections after the party ended up getting thrashed at the polls. And while the Republicans invested huge resources in state campaigns so that they could control more of the redistricting process following the 2010 census, the Obama administration was instead focused on the president's re-election in 2012. Biden cannot afford to make that same fucking mistake. But Biden should also show more support for carving out an exception to the filibuster in order to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which could have a direct impact on the midterms considering the success that the red states have had with passing voting restriction laws. The more Biden can do to help the party that brought him into the White House with majorities in both chambers of Congress, the better positioned he will be to mitigate the many challenges that lie ahead. August was a tough month for Biden, and some of the bigger constraints on his presidency have become crystal fucking clear. But presidents don't have to be defined by the obstacles that they face. The less successful ones, like Trump, are eventually swamped by them. The best presidents find ways to build political coalitions that can allow them to continue moving forward. But time will only tell where Biden falls on this trajectory. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so that you be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.